everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Adventures in Advising podcast. My name is Ryan Shekel. I'm your host for this episode and really excited about the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the whole publishing and scholarship side of things. We've got a great panel of guests, but wherever you're at, whatever you're doing in academic advising and higher education right now, it might not feel like we've got space and time for these sorts of ideas, especially if you're in the midst of a busy summer of new students or planning for the next term or whatever it is. So we appreciate the time that you're taking just to step away from perhaps that really busyness and just think a bit about how we can contribute to larger conversations and make a difference in the work that we're doing from the perspective of scholars and practitioners and really engage with some of the meaningful bits of educating, advising, and the adventures that can lead us on. So if we could bring in our panelists, we'll introduce them. Really excited for the chance to talk with the group that we have today. The impetus, the idea behind this was in part from their roles on the Publications Advisory Board for NACADA, but they all have really fascinating stories, and the things that they're doing in academic advising, I think, are going to resonate well with our listeners. And so I'm going to go sort of in order of how we're on the screen right now, and I'll start with Melissa. Melissa Cumbia, if you could introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about your journey in higher education and academic advising. How did you arrive in your current role?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. I am Melissa. I'm an academic advisor in the Virginia Tech College of Natural Resources and Environment. So I'm a primary role advisor. And in the beginning, I thought I was going to be a language arts teacher. So I was starting down that path and taking classes in education and working at a school. And I also started working in a college tutoring center. And that's what made me realize that I really liked working with college students in a higher education setting. And so that led me to pivot and take my first job in advising, which was at Wake Forest University. And I was at Wake for a few years. And then when I got the chance to switch to an advising role at Virginia Tech, which is my alma mater, I took that. And so now I've been advising at VT for about 9 years, which, all sounds very smooth now, but was a lot to work through at the time, kind of pivoting from one career to another, and continuously explaining to people what I do in advising. So, yeah.
Awesome. I know there's lots of folks who have that experience, and I think one of the interesting dynamics is the return to a prior institution, whether as a student or in another role, and so lots of folks have sorted that through, but we also have Sarah Bechtel on the panel today. Sarah, could you tell us a little bit about your journey in higher ed and academic advising and how you got to where you are now?
Yes, of course. Well, thank you again for having us. We're really excited to be here. So my journey started as a graduate assistant. I was advising honors college students at Old Dominion University and found out that's a career. I didn't know that was a thing. So I was super excited about it. No one ever told me that you could advise students and do a job in it. So that was really unique. So when I graduated with my master's, I went on to become an admissions counselor at Virginia Wesleyan University and really loved higher ed, but wanted to go back to advising. So I started looking for jobs in academic advising and found a position at Virginia Tech in the School of Neuroscience and loved it. So I started advising there. I got involved in lots of committees and taking on different leadership roles. And so now I serve as our associate director for undergraduate advising and academic initiatives in the College of Science Dean's office at Virginia Tech. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome. And Alanna Bitzel, if you could tell us a little bit about your role, where you are now, and what your journey's been like in higher ed.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think there's some commonalities between my experience and my co-authors here, my co-panelists, in that things are never kind of linear, at least in my experience, that we've all had twisty and turny journeys in higher ed. But so at one point in my life, I was in training to be a lawyer and policy person. I am not. But at my former institution, the University of Texas at Austin, some of us are familiar with it, a lot of burnt orange there. I did my undergraduate and graduate work. And while I was in training to do these other things, I had also been in writing centers. I started in writing centers in 2003 and kind of never left. I like to say I grew up in writing centers. And with a story that's going to take way longer than we have here, I ended up working in athletic student services at UT Austin, running their writing program, and along the way started advising. Similar to Sarah, I was like, how does one become an advisor? What is this? Oh, people actually go to grad school for that? That's wild. And I ended up serving as an advisor for student athletes for 13 years before moving in 2024 out to the desert. I now live in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I'm assistant director of the Writing Center here at UNLV. And yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, well, welcome, Melissa, Sarah, Alanna. We're going to talk through a lot of things. And in our conversations before and preparing for this, we did talk a little bit about the Publications Advisory Board for NACADA. And I'm not sure if anyone would want to take a swipe at sort of like what that is and explaining it to those who might not be familiar with it. But also, could you share how you got involved in the advisory board? How did you go from somebody who maybe was aware of NACADA to being in that sort of position of having influence, at least being at the table for conversations about the publication's priorities of the global advising or global community for academic advising? So I'm not sure who wants to start first, but just tell us a little bit about the board, what it does, and then how you got to be on the board.
I can start and then others can add to it. But so the Publication Advisory Board, it's a lot of fun to serve on because basically you advise NACADA, the NACADA EO, on kind of what we should do next with publications. So you get to hear updates on all the different publication venues, like what's happening with books and with the journal and with review. You get to make recommendations in terms of what new publications are needed or what existing publications need to be revised and revamped and revisited. And so, yeah, it's learning more about publications. It's volunteering for publication things. So through working with the Publication Advisory Board, I've done sessions on writing for NACADA, and I've done book reviews and things like that. But, like so many things with NACADA, for me, getting involved with the Publications Advisory Board was sort of a matter of hearing about it and then asking about it. Like, this thing exists. What is that? Who does that? It was sort of the more people that were interested in being involved and contributing to that, the better. So I applied to participate with the Publications Advisory Board, I think in 2021, and I've been serving on the board since about 2022. So it's been a few years now, and it's been honestly fun the whole time to just hear what's going on in the NACADA publications world.
I can piggyback off that to say, and thanks, Melissa, for providing that synopsis of what the board does. When I moved to Nevada in 2024, I was honestly just looking for additional ways to get involved with NACADA. I'd already had experience on the ACD side, serving as chair of advising student athletes, and on the Region 9 side, I was working as the professional development chair, but was also interested in getting involved in the administrative division. And the PAB seemed like a natural fit for me with my focus on writing, my background in writing centers. I have also been involved with publications in the writing center field. So I was just curious about NACADA and publications and reached out in 2024 to express interest in joining, and then did. So,
and I have I would say probably more of a different way of getting onto the Publications Advisory Board. So I actually went to a NACADA annual conference a few years back, and I was the person. I took my one of the books that came out and went around to every author I could find and had them sign my book. I was just so excited to meet them. So I ended up meeting the chair of the publication advisory board, and she was like, I'm so like flattered by this. Would you like to join the board? I think you'd be great for it. And I was like, sure. I didn't even know there was a board at the time. I didn't know it existed. So I was just so excited. I was like, well, sure. Yeah, I would love to join and learn more about this. And that's how I ended up getting on the board. I met the chair just for wanting to have their signature. I felt like a big fan.
Well, hey, I often point to the book signing that was held when Academic Advising Approaches was published. I'm pretty sure that was the 2013 annual conference, as sort of sparking like the new start in my career. I'd been advising since 2002, and I'd been to annual conferences. The first one I went to was in 2003. Don't do the math on that. I'm old, yes, but when 2013, when Academic Advising Approaches was published, I was like, yeah, I'm going to get their signatures. They hosted the signing during breakfast. And I remember standing there with a group of people, and a lovely, appropriately sized group. But I had turned and looked in the sort of the grand hall where they were having breakfast, and how many people weren't engaging with the publications of the association. And I just thought it felt like a bunch of people were missing one of the biggest things that have happened when books come out. They're so significant. And so that sparked the idea for advising Star Wars stuff or whatever. And a lot has happened since then. But if I hadn't done that first thing, I don't know if I would have had the idea about publications and how significant they can be. And from your roles on the board and the things that you've done as reviewers and otherwise, what do you wish more advisors understood about publishing?
I can share a few thoughts. I'll take the leap. I think a few things, but these are also just thoughts I would share with students, staff, faculty that I'm working with on writing projects, which is kind of my day in and day out. But one, and we talk about this in our work, that writing is a social endeavor, and that you have people, a community that you can work with and rely on. You aren't expected to sit in silence in a room and just crank something out, in misery. That's not the writing of today. So that it is a very social endeavor. And because of that, it's also very possible. And I think we really try to emphasize that in our pieces, that while it might seem intimidating because of the support, because of the community, because of the resources available, that it's definitely very possible. And what I and we at My Writing Center talk a lot about is you just start where the ideas are. It could be any idea, start there. You don't have to force an issue or try to sound a certain way. Just start where the ideas are and go from there. And there will be people to help you.
I would just add that I think that it would be great if more academic advisors saw themselves as experts in advising with things to write about. So that that idea that, start where the idea is and trust that so much about what that looks like in practice, and that would be a great thing to share through writing. So, just seeing it as a little bit less intimidating, a little more doable, and knowing that you have lots of options for the type of writing you do, the formality, the length, the type of topic. Like, you can find a writing project that's a good fit for you personally, and that leverages your interests and your strengths and what you know a lot about.
I think it's just about jumping in and getting started, taking that leap of faith, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But you definitely tried, and that's the point. You want to try and put yourself out there, and that may be scary, but at least in the back of your mind that you did try something new, which I think is really important when it comes to publishing.
Yeah, well, I'm curious because you've all contributed in some way. You've all been involved in the publishing world. When did you first start to see yourself as someone who might do that sort of thing, contribute to the scholarship of academic advising? Was there a person, an experience, maybe a moment that convinced you your ideas should be shared with others?
I can jump in on that one. So I would say for me, the first thing I probably ever published was my master's thesis. And I was back in 2016. So we're going back a little bit of time. But when I tried to decide something new, I felt like I kept just putting other stuff in front of my plate that was more of not necessarily a priority, but was easier to me, like putting in a conference proposal. That just seemed easier to me than tackling on like a publication. So I decided to try something new in 2024. I co-authored an article with a couple other colleagues about something that was unique to our particular unit on campus. And when we did it and it went through, we were just so excited. And bringing those other two people on board was really helpful. And if I don't think I ever brought those two other people on board, I don't think it would ever have gone through. So like having that co-authorship was really important for me. So that's what I would say where I started with the scholarship.
I'm curious Melissa's thoughts on this, but how I got into, I've published before in the writing center field, but it wasn't until a conversation with Melissa, I think, where we connected and started brainstorming ideas for, I guess those were kind of the initial seeds for what became the articles that we've worked on. But, and I don't think she'll mind me sharing this, but we kind of came up with some ideas, but then had a hard time, I don't know, gaining momentum. I think just other things, as Sarah was describing, other priorities or requirements in life. And so she and I had a starting place, but then she, in conversation with Sarah, realized that there was also interest there in similar topics. And so when we kind of reconvened as a trio, that was what it took to actually kind of get the projects moving forward. And I'm sure Melissa has some other thoughts on that too.
Yeah, my very first advising writing project was I had worked on a presentation for the 2020 NACADA annual conference, which turned out to be virtual and not in Puerto Rico as planned, but was still a great experience. And I worked on a presentation for that conference. And during the conference, I went to the Publish with NACADA session. And I listened to them talk about the different publication venues and the process. And I had just done all this research and work and thinking about this topic. And I thought, I wonder if we could turn that into an article. I wonder if we could make that an Academic Advising Today article. So I pitched it to the colleague who did the presentation with me. And like Sarah, I would not have done anything with it if that person hadn't said, yes, I will write this with you. That was great and very, very rewarding and such an interesting thing to do. And then from there, it really was like conversations with people and saying, oh, that's a really interesting topic. Would you ever be interested in writing about that? It seems like we both are interested in this idea, would you want to write about that? So, but that is how it got started, is a NACADA session on publishing and writing with NACADA. That was so impactful on me that I've now done that Publish with NACADA session like 5 times at different conferences and things to try and spread the word that, that's an option. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll touch base on some of the things that y'all brought up in your answers as we talk more today. But, I was thinking about, especially early in my career, how much I heard that we needed to engage with scholarship, and maybe, there'd be times when I'd come across an article or, a book would be published or something where I would, I'd be like a consumer of the scholarship maybe, but I just don't know if I ever thought about being a producer of scholarship. Why do you think some advisors make that leap and others don't?
I'll start. So I would say it kind of comes down a lot to time and your bandwidth power. Many advisors kind of take on like caseloads that could be overwhelming at times and may lead to burnout, which is quite possible. So I would say that is I would say that's probably one of the bigger things. But then I think it also comes down to like many advisors compare themselves with faculty with like PhDs. They may feel like they're a little intimidated, put out scholarship because they may not have that credential behind their name, which creates this like perpetual cycle of like this imposter syndrome. So this could just add to like the putting it off, like I'm not going to do this because of X, Y, Z. So maybe just like the feeling like it's not going to be good enough, or it's not going to be seen as like published work or scholar or contributing to this, like to the field. Like that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that workload and bandwidth is a big factor. Like a lot of advisors feel like they're at capacity, and the idea of adding a project to that can feel like a lot. And so that's why, one of the things our group has tried to do some writing about and some presenting on is how to make writing projects more doable, how to break them down into more doable steps. So I think that like capacity may be a challenge for sure, just time in the day. I think that there's no limit of like advisors are so willing to share with one another. There's so much information sharing at presentations and in mentoring programs and in discussion forums. But I don't know that we've done enough to like help people in the profession see writing as a form of information sharing and discussion and things like that. So I think reframing publishing a little more as like, advisors are helpers, right? And willing to help students as well as their colleagues, and writing is a means to do that. So
I would echo what Sarah and Melissa have said, and maybe just add that there needs to be some level of support or nudging. I think it goes back to something, maybe Sarah, you said it, of just, or maybe Melissa, but of advisors not seeing themselves as scholars, of not having that perception, or, associating kind of scholarship publication with, academia and like faculty. And if your title, your job designation at your particular institution doesn't kind of have that built into the title, or maybe it's not in your PD or your PDQ, whatever your job description is, then you might think that that's not for you, right? I don't have the credentials. It's not an expectation for me. But if you have supportive peers, colleagues, teammates, supervisors who are advocating for that, I think it makes it more possible. And just as what Melissa was saying, I think we just need to continue that conversation with advisors and do that kind of gentle prodding of, the programs that you are leading, the initiatives that you are implementing, big or small, are potential fruitful areas for exploration in an article. And that article doesn't have to be, a 30-page scholarly journal article. It can be something practical, something more day-to-day focused, like an AAT piece. And so kind of helping them see the importance of the work that they're doing on a daily basis and transforming that into a written version for public consumption.
Sure. And Alanna, you sort of indicated at least one of the publishing opportunities that exists in NACADA. But for those who aren't familiar, what's the range of opportunities, the sort of channels or venues that advisors can share their scholarship and their perspectives in writing?
Yeah, so I would definitely encourage advisors to check out the fuller descriptions on the NACADA website. But there's a few different options: the journal, the NACADA journal, the NACADA review, AAT or academic advising today. And Melissa may want to jump in here because I know she's reviewed for these. But you have the journal, which is that more kind of scholarly, pedagogical, heavy, theory-driven work, versus AAT or academic advising today, which might be more practical applications, more speaking to kind of daily implementation of like strategy and whatnot. But I'll let my co-panelists jump in and add additional thoughts there.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about the fact that NACADA has so many different publication venues is they kind of exist on this range of things that are short, very concise and informal and quick, faster in terms of publication timeline. And those are things like, the blog or academic advising today. And then you get into the review, the journal, the pocket guides, like a book, which is a long-term commitment, like a book chapter or something. And they kind of increase in length and formality, and they differ a little bit in requirements. But that's where that idea of like, if you're feeling unsure about a writing project, in part because you're reading things that you can't imagine yourself writing, you may want to read some of the other things out there, because there are these different publication venues that are very different in style and length and formality and topic and kind of purpose. So there's definitely a range that exists within NACADA and in related associations and organizations. So
cool. So from y'all's point of view, as both contributors and consumers of scholarship and your roles in the association, are there any just common misconceptions, things that you see come up often that advisors have about publishing their work?
I would say I touched on one of them and what I just said about different publication venues, but I think timeline often takes people by surprise in terms of how long it can take to sort of work on the different pieces of a writing process, and then how long it sits with reviewers, and then that there may be like a revise and resubmit stage or a revision stage, and all of that's before publication. So I think like helping people have realistic expectations for the timeline on a writing project, is one big misconception to address. I'm sure we can think of some others though.
No, I think that's the big one, Melissa. And this is not limited for me to just the publication process, since I work with writers on a daily basis, but that the writing process takes longer than you think it's going to, which is okay. That's how it's supposed to be. But all stages of the writing process and then the feedback process, I think that one of the big things that I was really advocating for in our work is just that feedback is awesome. Getting feedback is awesome. I think those who are newer to writing and publication can get very thrown off by any sort of feedback. They can misperceive it as a criticism or that their project is no longer worthwhile, which is absolutely not the case. And one thing I say a lot in my daily work, but also with my involvement with PAB and my own writing projects, is just that if someone takes the time to give you feedback, they actually care about your project. And so you shouldn't be discouraged by that. But it can be intimidating at first, and responding to reviewer feedback does take more time. So yeah, I would absolutely echo what Melissa said and just add those additional pieces.
I would echo Alanna and Melissa as well. Definitely, they hit that one. I totally agree with both of them on this. And with that timeline is like, many advisors will put in a conference presentation proposal, and the timeline for that is way faster than it is to put in an article, because you're starting from scratch basically and then submitting it. So with the conference proposal, it is a shorter amount of words typically too, so that it's quicker, it's faster return, and some more advisors are just more comfortable with that. And then taking the leap and going forward with an article, that does take some more dedication.
So let's imagine then a primary role advisor who's never published before, but they want to get started. Where do you suggest they begin that journey?
I know in the work the three of us have done together before, we've said that good starting points can be thinking about topic, writing team, what you want to write about, who you want to write with, or the type of publication. But I would say I really like topic as a starting point, because I think if you can think about the topic that you want to write about, that will help you decide who you might want to write with and what venue you might want to write for. And, in thinking about topic, really, really thinking about what's a good topic for me personally, right? What can I speak to? what do I have enough genuine interest in to dedicate all that time that we were just talking about to it? But, the same types of ideas that come to mind for topics for presentations will often be good writing topics. So, what's something that I do that's unique or really, really efficient, or what's something I'm highly trained in that can be applied to advising? What's a problem I see that we need to be talking more about? All those sorts of things that come up for presentation topics can be good publication topics. And I think if you have a good topic, that inspires writing and writing progress and a writing team and all the things that follow.
I don't think I have much to add other than I agree. I think it can be something that you're personally noodling over, something that you've been thinking about a lot, something that you've been griping about, that you have a solution to or a strategy. I think also, kind of going back to some previous discussion that we had, I think consulting with your supervisor, your colleagues, because if you don't necessarily feel like you are expert at any one thing, go to those people who are going to remind you how awesome you are and the amazing things that you're doing. And those conversations might help inspire you as well. Or, when you're going into your performance eval for the year and looking back on all your accomplishments for the year, be like, oh, right, I did do all these things. I should write about that.
I love that. And it's so funny because you do put these things on performance evaluations, but you also put them in your CV too. And you look back at time and wow, I actually did that. Trying to figure out when did I publish this article and how much time has gone by since the last one too. But I was going to echo what Melissa was saying as well. I think your writing group is really important. I think picking the people, and if Melissa would never reached out from the start, I don't know if we would be here in this podcast to this day. We've gotten so close as a team, even though we're all in different places. And even though Melissa and I are at the same institution, we're very far away. The institution is very big. So I don't know if I would have interacted with her as well. And then getting to meet Alanna, that was pretty cool because Melissa brought her on as well. So creating this team and making sure we're accountable and working together and making sure that we set up dates and times and getting together, I think is really important. So I think your team dynamic is really key to getting started in publishing, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah. I like that idea of topic team type of publication. I think it's a good way to sort through it. And we're all going to be motivated, I think, in different ways. And it's great to have an on-ramp for everybody. And we've heard those types of answers. But Melissa, you mentioned that your first published article began as a conference presentation. And, we can pull back the curtain a little bit because everybody focuses on the completed publication. And we've talked about process and timeline and that kind of stuff. But can you just walk us through how you went from, I'm submitting this proposal for a session, I'm giving it, to here we go, we're going to write on it. How did that happen? What were the things that maybe we've not discussed that you feel were really critical for that journey?
Yeah, that's a big process to work through. But I think that, in terms of how to take that conference presentation and turn it into an article, I am an outline person. My colleagues here can attest to that. But, if I do a presentation, I have an outline for kind of okay, what are we covering in that presentation? And so revisiting that and figuring out what in that outline needs to be adjusted for it to become a article outline rather than a presentation outline. So where's my argument? Where's my thesis? What pieces of that outline don't work for a article the way they would have for a publication or for a presentation? So, maybe there's a little bit less about me in an article than there would be in a presentation, or some of the pieces of audience engagement might not be in there, but, removing some things and then creating more space for some of the things that you do to prepare for a presentation in terms of research and brainstorming, but you you remove, putting that back into an article outline. So in terms of that, like, okay, how do I take this topic that I already did a lot of work on and convert it from a presentation to an article? I would say go back to the outline and revamp it from a presentation outline to an article outline. And then from there, you already have so much of your material. You know, you have your thoughts on things, you have your arguments and your ideas and your research. You just have to kind of build it out from that outline. And then in terms of actually chunking that into a writing project, right? I would set an end date and then work backwards. So like my writing project process almost always includes the 5 key steps of like research, outline, draft 1, draft 2, final review, right? And so if I know I want to submit something by this date, then I have 5 check-in points where I'm trying to get those things done by a check-in leading up to those dates. And that can be a really good way to like, it's too much to do it all at once. You have to kind of have it piece by piece, bite by bite. And so having a task that you try to complete at certain checkpoints can kind of help you move through the different stages of a project. Would you all have things to add? I love that process of like, I have a topic, I've done a lot of work for it. Let me make it both an article and a presentation because you already have so much material. So
I would definitely echo what Melissa was saying. She actually was the person in our team that like put us in like backwards mode and told us what we should be doing and like where we're stepping and like kind of gave like a final like summary recap, like what we need to do for our next check-in. So I would definitely say that's how like a really good way of doing it. And it worked with our team as well. But I also wanted to point out that like when Melissa's article came out, I actually remember when that came out. It got like advertised at Virginia Tech as well. And I was just so amazed like to see an academic advisor contributing to scholarship that like I was inspired by just seeing her name in the print, but like maybe like one day I could do that too. So that was just like really inspirational to see that happen for her.
It's awesome. Yeah, I remember, I'm trying to remember what conference it was, but there was an institution that just decided as an advising community that they were going to put out their own publication about their experiences and really leave it pretty wide open to the types of writing that could be done. And I was like, everybody could be doing this. You could be doing writing projects and writing about academic advising at your own institution too, and just how inspiring it can be and how it sort of sparked curiosity. And I'm wondering from your points of view, I know you're doing so much stuff, you got a lot going on, but are there any, big topics or questions, maybe even approaches to the work you're doing that are sparking your curiosity right now?
So Ryan, you're saying like what sparks our ideas for a writing project, things like that. Yeah. I'm involved with the NACADA's advisor wellbeing and retention advising community. And so anytime a topic comes up that's about like, how do we help advisors flourish professionally in their role, and feel good about the work that they're doing, I'm always intrigued by that. And then I like topics that help me focus in on working with specific student populations. So thinking about like, okay, well, how do I help, change of major students or pre-vet students? Like what's different about my work with that group of students? And so I always like topics like that where I can kind of focus in and think really intentionally about work in a certain setting or with a certain group of students. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, and I think Melissa and I actually connected initially through her work with well-being and retention, but I was going to say advisor well-being and burnout continues to be a topic I hear people talk about. So it's not necessarily a topic I personally want to pursue a writing project on right now, but I think there is a need for it because the conversation has just continued. And I think with kind of the rise of online and hybrid environments, the implementation of AI across its different institutions, increases in caseloads and whatnot, I think that's definitely a hot topic that there should be more writing about right now. I'm also interested in kind of advisor supports at different institutions and how advisors are supported by leadership, or what infrastructure is in place to support advisors, advising career ladders, those types of things. So I've been kind of noodling on those topics. But yeah, I would definitely say well-being and retention just continue across all of my different roles with NACADA. It comes up with advising student athletes. It definitely has come up in Region 9 on an ongoing basis. I really think that there's a desire, like a craving for advisors to just continue to engage with that topic.
Well, speaking of the topic of well-being, I'm curious how your writing and scholarship endeavors have influenced your own well-being professionally, your identity as an advisor. Tell us more about how it's enriched your approach and your perspective on the work that you do.
I think one great thing about doing writing projects is that it invites you to kind of zoom out and look at the big picture, when so much of our work is in the little details and the day-to-day and the routine. And so that just helps you reframe your work and remember how meaningful it is and how impactful it is. And so I think that is really encouraging and good for my well-being. And then I would also just say doing writing projects with people has just been so good for forming like meaningful professional relationships, like really deep connections with people I wouldn't otherwise connect with, and people outside of my unit and outside of my institution, and just having this really neat network of people I'm close to across the profession has just been incredibly encouraging, and honestly, like very much retained me to the field in terms of, like, helping me get through the inevitable tough times and busy times. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think interacting with colleagues in that meaningful way really gives you a sense of perspective. And it's been very important to me as someone who's very tied into NACADA but no longer advises myself. It's really helped me stay connected with the larger conversations and to know what is coming up for people. And I think that's one of the lovely things about the association, is that it puts people into these great conversations with each other. And just personally too, writing and publishing in this way allows you to flex a different part of your brain. And I think that is important for continual learning and growing, and just, to get yourself out of your head, get yourself out of the daily grind, which I think can become, can really wear you down over time if you're busy all the time. I was recently talking with colleagues about, I think maybe this group, about how it's like the higher ed calendar now. I feel like there's always a busy time. There's no relative downtime like there used to be. It's just like, I'm always busy. Like, it doesn't matter what time of year. But amidst that busyness, like getting to do something creative like this, I think it's so reinvigorating, besides going to conferences and getting to see people and interact with them in person or online. I think it's another way to just stay refreshed and engaged.
I totally agree with that. And just like to dive more onto like the meaningful relationships with people, with even just like our group alone, like we would meet so regularly with so many to talk through like an article, and like our second article that we were writing as well, is that like I feel like we also got to talk about like our life updates and like get to know each other more than just colleagues, and they become friends. So like that relationship has definitely developed. And I got to meet Alanna actually in person at the last NACADA conference in Las Vegas. So it was really cool to like see her from Zoom to in person. That was really neat. So that I would say like the developing relationships with people, but as like, and like a personal side for me, like it's made me more confident as an advisor. Like it has boosted my confidence. Like I can do this, I can write, like, and I can also try more new things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the theme of collaboration and what you're gaining from this collaboration, but also what you're able to contribute because of it. And I'm kind of curious, what have you learned from your collaborators, and what have you found makes that collaboration, particular approaches that have been taken or things you've seen others doing that you're like, oh, if it weren't for that, I don't know if we'd be making progress. Collaboration is a big part of being successful in academic advising, and I'd love to hear y'all's perspectives on it.
So one of the things I would say, and I know we all have probably thoughts on this as well, is that keeping, if you do find your writing group, is keeping it small. There's 3 of us. So keeping maybe 2 to 3 people, I think, is really important. It's easier to check in with a smaller group and stay on track with a project, and also be able to contribute more to projects as well. You're able to add more content than let's say a project that has, 6 or 7, 8 people on it. That's a lot more people you have to keep up with and check in with. And then also you might not be able to put as much content into your article. So that would be from my perspective, keeping the writing group small is really important.
I mean, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I do think shared approach has been particularly helpful for our trio, a shared accountability system. I mean, we did meet regularly, whether it's, we were all calendar people. We live and die by our calendar. So if it's not on the calendar, it's not happening, right? So whether what's in the calendar is a meeting that we're going to have together or a deadline that we need to add, content to our particular section by that deadline, and maintaining that system throughout the process. We talked earlier about working backward, but I think that was really vital for our group. And also building in time for when we needed more in-depth discussion, maybe we need to wrestle with what was, our particular tactic in this section of the article or whatnot, so allowing for, okay, we're all going to do our part, but then let's build in time so that we can go through it. I mean, our team was so good about, we are going sentence by sentence, word by word, bird by bird, bit by bit, every single thing. And it's not always the most glorious thing. It's not super sexy from the outsider perspective, where you're like, how many times did we use this word at this page? But we all had that commitment of okay, we're going to do this. And I think an effective team has to have that shared commitment where no one person is just doing it all. You each have to equally contribute.
Yeah, I think those are great points and things we've talked about as a group. Kind of we've had moments of this kind of seems like it's working well. What's working here? As we're working on things and kind of reflecting on that to figure out how can we keep this working, or how can we use this in other groups that we're all connected to. And I think the small groups, I think the regular check-ins, I think the fact that we all want to be there and we want to do this. I mean, this is nothing like the dreaded group project of school days, where not everyone wants to be doing the assignment to the same extent. So, there's a lot of enthusiasm that's contagious when we're meeting and talking about a project. And I think everyone contributing, like Alanna said, is really important. But I also think there's a little bit of give and take and flexibility in terms of we have had times where one of us will be in a busy season and one of us will do more. And there's always a sense of shared contribution and a shared sense of, connection to the project and investment in it. But it doesn't always exactly equal the same tally of words, written down on the project. So there's a little bit of flexibility and give and take depending on what each of us kind of has going on, that keeps the project going. Because if I'm in a quiet time and can do more, but Sarah's in a busy time and can't, we keep it going. And then we trade off when those times change for us. So I think a little bit of flexibility and adaptability too really helps in a writing collaboration.
Absolutely. I'm sure folks who are listening to this podcast can hear the value of your collaboration and how well y'all work together. But I hope also that they hear that they don't need to do this writing and scholarship thing alone. We started with the idea that Alanna said that this is a social process. This is a sharing idea, and this is something that is done in collaboration. And y'all have definitely shown that. So Melissa Cumbia, Sarah Bechtel, Alanna Bitzel, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and for talking with us today.
Thank you. This is great.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.